Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kevin Danaher. Russia has strongly criticized the U.S. over what it calls violations of human rights, citing torture, Guantanamo Bay, and death of innocent death row inmates. Now, the situation in the United States is a far cry from the ideals that Washington proclaims, the report has said. A view that is becoming more common for a country that is supposed to set the ideal for democracy. In this news analysis, we'll ask our guests why the U.S. is on a downward trend on human rights and whether the way Occupy protesters have been handled spells the new status quo when it comes to how Americans will be treated.
Russia's foreign ministry has attacked the U.S. human rights record in a report on injustices and rights violations around the globe. The report focuses on EU nations, Canada and Georgia, but the longest section of it highlights violations in the U.S. In the 90-page document published Wednesday, Moscow played down the authority of the United States as a global judge of human rights by touching on incidents of human rights abuses in the U.S., including torture, phone tapping, and crackdown on peaceful protesters. Moscow criticized U.S. President Barack Obama for failing to shut the military prison at Guantanamo Bay and accused the White House of sheltering officials and CIA operatives from prosecution. The report also slammed Obama for legalizing indefinite and extrajudicial custody and the return of court-martials. The report also accuses the U.S. of prying into citizens' personal lives and violating the rights of Muslim Americans in the fight against terrorism. The high number of wrongful murder convictions has also been mentioned. Finally, the report concludes the situation in the U.S. is a far cry from the ideals that Washington proclaims. The U.S. State Department has not officially commented on the report yet, but a spokesman said Washington would not regard this as interference in its internal affairs. Since 1976, the United States has published annual reports lecturing other countries on the subject of human rights violations, but its own performance and record, especially after the September 11 attacks in 2001, is making it increasingly harder for Washington to keep the upper hand. Russia and China are now publishing annual reports of human rights abuses in the U.S., and other countries might follow lead. The U.S. has also been slammed by international rights groups over its human rights record. In July 2011, for example, Human Rights Watch published a highly critical report on U.S. war abuses. In another report, it slammed the U.S. as the world's largest jailer with 2.3 million people behind bars.
Well, let's get an idea from our guests, the situation regarding human rights in the United States. Let me introduce our guests. We have human rights and international lawyer Paul Wolf, who joins us from Washington. From the International Action Center, Maupin joins us from New York. And co-founder of Global Exchange, Kevin Danaher, joins us from San Francisco. I'd like to welcome all our guests for this edition of the Press TV News Analysis. Paul Wolf, let me first go to you. Russia criticizing the U.S. on the issue of human rights. I would think U.S. officials must be somewhat uncomfortable having Russia criticize them. But then again, doesn't Russia have a point?
Thanks, Kavi. I think Russia does have a point. And I think that this kind of report is very helpful. I don't think it's something that should be taken as anything other than constructive criticism. And I do agree with you, or with the statement made in the introduction to this show, that the United States has been in a downward trend for many years now. You know, it's been 10 years since the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and yet every year we seem to see more and more harsh measures taken, not only in legislation that's passed in the United States with regard to the topics that were brought up, such as wiretapping or the treatment of prisoners in Guantanamo, but also actions that are taken without any legal basis whatsoever, such as extrajudicial killing of people in Pakistan and Yemen. And we have to wonder, after 10 years, where are we going? Is this a trend that is ever going to stop? From a legal perspective, we see things that are really unprecedented in American history. In the past, and I'm talking about for hundreds of years, we've had categories either prisoner of war or criminal suspects. And now we see a class of persons that have been emerged who are considered terrorists, who have no legal rights, and there seem to be no rules whatsoever regarding their treatment. And it seems like in the United States we're unable to engage in this kind of self-criticism, and all of our institutions, whether it be the government or the news media or even human rights organizations, seem to fall short when it comes to self-criticism. So I think that really the time has come for the United States to address some of these human rights issues. And I think it's very helpful to have these reports, even though one may say, well, this is politically motivated, the Russians are angry about this or that, or even press TV for that matter. The news media also. I think foreign news media, foreign human rights organizations, and to some extent foreign governments can play a very positive role, because I don't think the American people as a whole support all of these horrible things that our government is doing. And I think that that's partly what you see with the Occupy Wall Street movement. It's partly why you see a candidate like Ron Paul, who is from the very extreme right, getting support from all across the board in something that's hard to understand. So I welcome the Russian report, and I think that it's not something that we should run away from. It's something that we should address.
Well, you cited some examples, and of course when we get to some of the examples that the Russian report did talk about, but Charlie Maupin, I'd like to, when it comes to the issue of human rights, I mean, give us your impression. It does cover a wide range of issues, granted, but the fact that it has escalated in its frequency in the United States, torture, harsh police tactics, bad prison conditions, and an unfair judicial system, why is the trend increasing in its frequency, you think?
I think the trend in repression in the United States is increasing due to the fact that people are standing up and demonstrating. The fangs have always been there. The vicious ugliness of the rulers and their ruthless efforts to maintain their rule have always been there. Just in 1982, the U.S. dropped bombs in Philadelphia and destroyed an entire block against the MOVE organization. But for a long time, they haven't had to ratchet up the repression because people haven't been standing up to them. But this Occupy Wall Street movement has opened up a new area of political space where people are taking to the streets in huge numbers. And millions of people are learning the truth that activists like myself have known for a long time, which is that in New York City and anywhere else in this country, if you're a Zionist or a Ku Klux Klansman and you have a march, the police will escort you nicely and everything will be fine. But if you stand up against Wall Street and you stand up to these bankers and you have a message they don't want to hear, they'll come down on you with pepper spray and mace and their orange nets, and they'll come out and they'll brutalize you. And that's the truth. This whole idea of the U.S. as a democracy is a sham. If you stand up to these ruling elites, they'll come down just as viciously as they came down on striking workers back in the 1900s when unions were illegal, just like they came down on the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Struggle. They rule this country. The Wall Street elite rules, and they will be vicious to defend their rule.
Okay, I was going to get into the notorious prison in Guantanamo Bay for Kevin Danaher, but since we have Caleb talk about the Occupy protesters, it was real interesting, Kevin Danaher, that Amnesty International in its 2011 human rights record in the United States said there were almost 500 cases since the year 2001 of the use of taser guns by police, which resulted in that many deaths. And when you figure that out, that's almost 50 deaths a year. And the people that were killed as a result, they were unarmed. That police brutality there is a flagrant display of how police tactics have come into the bigger picture when it comes to human rights abuses in the U.S.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a tradition of unconstitutional execution of U.S. citizens by the U.S. government, which is not confined to within our borders. We've had cases in Yemen where CIA drones have shot rockets into cars carrying U.S. citizens and executed them. And the media portrayed them here as born in the United States, not as U.S. citizens, which they were, but as born in the United States as a way to lessen the human rights violation. I think one of the things we want to do, though, is we want to expand the definition of human rights to its full definition. It's not just political. It's not just a violation of people exercising their rights to free speech. It's also the right to eat, the right to a job, the right to have shelter. Those are enshrined in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the U.S. is signatory to. The U.S., thanks to Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the propagators and promoters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and yet we're in violation of those basic rights on a daily basis around the world. And I'll give you just one example. There's a child dying from the effects of bad water on average every 3 seconds in the world right now. And the technology to purify water is very inexpensive and could be spread all around the world to those areas where those children are dying, and yet it doesn't happen. And that you have to hold responsible the people who are at the top of our system, which is the 1% that's referred to by the Occupy movement. And that's the brilliant thing that's been done by the Occupy movement, is redefine the frame of politics from left to right to instead being up and down, to re-inject class analysis into the U.S. political struggle.
Well, you talk about holding the top responsible. Paul Wolf, well, let's look at Barack Obama, who's at the top. And, of course, the notorious prison in Guantanamo Bay, where terrorism suspects have been held since September 11, 2001 attacks. I mean, that was a clear, blatant, broken campaign promise by Obama. Don't you think the report is accurate, then, for criticizing Obama for legalizing indefinite and extrajudicial custody, including the return of court-martial, as the report indicated?
Absolutely. Well, I think President Obama has been a disappointment to just about everybody. We haven't seen any change. And in many cases, he's gone further than George Bush went. And I think that the most recent legislation you're talking about, where we could have really no legal process at all if the military determines that someone is a danger, a national security threat, they can simply grab them and lock them up. And most of these people who are being detained are being held incommunicado without even access to lawyers. Sometimes we have seen the courts step in Guantanamo and provide habeas corpus relief and provide military lawyers. Of course, these lawyers have top secret security clearances and can't share the classified evidence with their clients. And we have a lot of people in Guantanamo that we just really don't know that much about them. And that's not the only prison. There are still a number of prisons in Iraq. We have Abu Ghraib, we have Camp
Well, before you continue with that, let me get your reaction.
Let
Let me get your reaction when you heard about this law that pretty much an American citizen can be picked up, as you mentioned, incommunicado, be detained. What was your reaction when you heard that? I mean, many were shocked at this kind of law being actually not even vetoed by the U.S. president, who obviously promised that Guantanamo Bay would be closed.
Well, Kavi, I can't be shocked by anything anymore. I mean, if you've been watching this for the last 10 years, we see the government doing things that are clearly unconstitutional. They're violating treaties, as your other guest mentioned. They're violating principles of international law and things that other governments just are not doing. And we've gotten used to this. And the fact is, by the time anybody can do something about it in terms of a challenge in a court, of course, international tribunals are not going to help because the United States does not subject itself to their jurisdiction. It's just that the government, particularly the executive branch of the government, just does things. And by the time the courts catch up to them, by the time anyone can try to hold them accountable, it's too late. It's gone on for many years, or there's some other reason why it can't be enforced. In terms of Guantanamo, I mean, geez, even after Obama got in office, that was something that he was promoting, and so was Eric Holder, and that's only one issue of many. That was the one that President Obama said that he was going to fix.
Right.
So I really see us on the downward trend, and I just don't see anything changing at all.
Well, Caleb, maybe I should bring you Caleb Maupin in here. Obviously, you as a part of International Action Center, perhaps, and in line with the Occupy protesters, when you hear about really your freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, in terms of the Constitution, which is your right to exercise these, and you have laws passed where American citizens can be picked up the streets without any explanation for terrorism, alleged terrorism charges, that's people standing up then. So is that the hope, Occupy protesters standing up to the system?
That is absolutely the hope. You know, the Bill of Rights wasn't even originally in the Constitution. It took a popular movement and demonstrations back in the time of the founding of the United States for the Bill of Rights to even be added to the Constitution. It wasn't originally part of it. It was one in demands. And, you know, I mean, all this rhetoric about the U.S. being the freest country in the world, there are more people in prison by numbers alone than there are in any other country in the world. I mean, that's shocking. And this is a free country with so many people in prison. And in addition to that, I mean, the level of police brutality we've seen, you know, right now they're bracing because they realize their system cannot solve the economic problems it's facing right now. And they're bracing because they know Occupy Wall Street is just the beginning. They see the rumbling and they see that people are coming. And they're trying to brace everything and secure their system and lock down everything and prepare for the global class war that's coming, that's going to tear this system apart.
Okay, hold on now. Let me ask you two things. Two things, Cello. I'm sorry to jump in. How are they preparing?
Sure.
How are they preparing to deal with this, what you called global class warfare? Expand on the definition that you have for the global class warfare and their preparation for it.
Well, as far as global class warfare, it's the fact that there's a whole generation of people all throughout the world who this system won't be able to provide employment for, who all of the life that has been offered to people under this system is just disappearing. There's generations without jobs, and their only choice is to go out into the streets and to fight. And if they want to have a future, they're going to have to fight for it. So they're bracing for that, and their bracing for it includes things like this National Defense Authorization Act, which basically gives the government the right to detain anybody. It also includes these massive expansions in the prison system, massive expansions in the Department of Homeland Security and other means of repression, because they're bracing for the explosion that they know is coming. Occupy Wall Street is just the beginning. If you look around the world right now, things are just getting ready. Things are shaking. 2011 was just the beginning. Next year is going to be bigger, and the year after that is going to be bigger, and it's going to continue until this system falls apart.
Well, hopefully it's not going to involve expanding the prison systems, but let's take a look at the U.S. prison system. The U.S. has 2.3 million people behind bars, more than any other country in the world, and more than ever before in its history, actually. This number representing an incarceration rate of 762 per 100,000 residents, compared to 152 per 100,000 in Britain, 108 in Canada, and 91 in France. So let me ask you, Kevin Danaher, in continuation of these stats, inmates across California State Prison recently went on a hunger strike against their conditions and prolonged isolation. How bad is the situation in the U.S. prisons?
Well, it's bad, and it continues to get worse. And here in California, we have the perfect example of this policy not working. California went on a binge for several decades of building prisons. Those prisons are now full to over bursting. We're spending between $40,000 and $70,000 per person. You could send them to Harvard or Yale or Stanford for less money. And this is a symptom. It's a symptom of empire in decline. We have the misfortune or the fortune, whichever you want to call it, to be the last empire at the end of the age of empires. In an age of internet and mass literacy, empire can no longer function effectively. So we've inherited a system where large corporations and banks dominate our political system. They're the cause of the economic crisis, but a fix at the national level is not possible because the very people who caused the problem are the ones in control of making government policy. So the real effects, the real changes, the real progress is being made at the local level. And I'll give you one example. The federal government failed to sign on to the Kyoto Accords back under the Clinton administration. But there are almost 900 U.S. cities in all 50 states that have signed on to the Kyoto Protocols and are moving ahead with measures to reduce our impact on the environment. We are only 5% of the world's people producing 25% of the world's pollution, and we have about 25% of the world's prisoners. So the prison population growing is an example, a symptom of the collapsing economy, and the people in charge in Washington are not able to fix the problem.
Okay, Paul Wolf, I don't want this to be just stats against the U.S. and slamming the U.S. and keep slamming them for different type of stats in terms of their human rights violations, because we can keep going on and on. It's only a 27-minute program at tops here. But when we look at a country that had the best example of consumers, at least, and what it has turned into now, where 1 in 2 Americans is cited as either poor or low income, and after 4 months, as the year is drawing to a close, I think the Occupy protests have shown, because it's not just the economic issues they're highlighting, it is the justice system, it is the way that American officials, even previous to this one, have executed policies that has brought the situation to where it has. Is there a bigger picture, or is this the status quo in the U.S. as we see it on the issue of human rights and the way people are dealt with in this country, in your country?
Well, I think that's an interesting observation, that the Occupy Wall Street movement is essentially a reaction to the bad economic conditions, and there's only so much that the government can do about that. But it has also become a kind of magnet for a whole lot of issues that I would consider them to be progressive type issues, anti-war, even civil liberties issues. Normally, it's been the people on the left who have been repressed in the United States. So what we see really is a whole lot of kind of popular grievances all coalescing and getting a voice in this Occupy Wall Street movement. As far as where it's going, I guess I agree with your other guests. I think that as things get worse, and the indications are that they probably will get worse before they get better, I think we're going to see that movement become stronger. And I think also we'll see people on both sides becoming frustrated, and the potential for violence, or the potential for more extreme incidents at least, perpetrated by either side. So I think that's going to become much more important in the future. As far as the government policies, they seem to be completely impervious. Has anyone heard President Obama talk about Occupy Wall Street? It seems that the United States government is on a completely different track from what the popular sentiment is. And that's extremely dangerous. And I think there have been some illusions in this conversation we've had to an end or a collapse or a big kind of Armageddon. And I really hope that doesn't happen. But if nothing changes, the United States does seem to be on the same track as the Soviet Union, in which the population are really losing faith in the system, and the government is not responding to the popular demands and the popular grievances. And if that continues, then I do think that we're going to see some very drastic things happen in the future. I'm not going to say the sky is falling or that we're going to have some kind of a revolution, but I think that if the government doesn't react, then I think that the reaction and the ultimate correction that is made by the American people is going to be much more significant. So I think that the prudent thing to do, particularly in the next election, is to make sure that some of these issues that are clearly supported by large segments of the population become mainstream issues and are taken on by the mainstream Republicans and Democrats. And that's the way to really ease ourselves out of this crisis.
Caleb Maupin, we have about 45 seconds. I'm going to have you have the last word in this, whatever you'd like, regarding the topic we talked about.
Well, I just want to say that the reason they're bracing right now is because people are reviving the forgotten traditions of class struggle and fighting against the bankers. People are learning the American history about heroes not like George Washington, but like Huey Newton and William Z. Foster, and the revolutionary leaders in this country who have fought against the 1%. And that's why they're bracing in fear. So we should be hopeful at this moment. We shouldn't cower.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Caleb Maupin there from New York International Action Center. Thank you so much for your statements. We also have human rights and international lawyer Paul Wolf from Washington. Thank you. And from the co-founder of the Global Exchange, Kevin Danaher, he was talking to us from San Francisco. Thank you, the viewer, for watching another edition of Press TV News Analysis. Send us any comments or suggestions to newsroom@presstv.ir. I'm Kevin Danaher from the entire team here in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.